Welcome to the Professional Diploma in Web Development. If you've always had a keen interest in full-stack web development, then you've come to the right place. This course has been designed for both beginners as well as experienced web developers who seek a practical approach to web development. In this course, we learn all the fundamentals of web development and learn to code from scratch. We'll begin by installing and exploring our scripting environment, after which we'll move on to programming languages of the web. Now, this includes HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and even PHP. We'll cover both front-end and back-end technology stacks. Throughout the course, we'll develop a bunch of interactive web applications that you can add to your profile to strengthen your credibility as a full-stack web developer. From responsive e-commerce applications, style booking systems, and even HR systems, rest assured that this will be a hands-on course. As a bonus, you will also learn all about SQL databases and how to integrate them into your website. So stay tuned for all of this and more. In this lesson, we have a look at attributes. Now, attributes are a core function of any HTML website. We use attributes to control the behavior of elements, and attributes also act as a modifier for HTML element types and thus provide us with the ability to manipulate how elements function. Furthermore, we'll also have a look at the use of tables as well as multimedia files in HTML5. Now, in today's session of web development, lesson 4, we will be having a look at HTML attributes. And attributes are really powerful for the behavior control of our website. And we'll be delving quite deep into this by having looked at various elements and how we can manipulate each element's attributes to sort of obtain the desired outcome and behavior of those elements or objects. So with that being said, let's have a look at the objectives for today's lesson. First, we'll be working with HTML attributes, and here we'll define attributes. We'll have a look at what they are, how we use them, and which elements use which particular attributes. We will be focusing on a practical here, which I think is going to be quite exciting and hopefully not too long. And I really want to focus on doing a demonstration on the class and the ID attribute, which is really powerful and something every web developer must know. We'll also get our hands dirty with a bit of styling, okay? And then moving forward, we'll have a look at creating tables in HTML. And tables are an excellent way to organize information on your website, okay? And then lastly, we'll be looking at using multimedia or embedding multimedia files into our websites. And this includes things like images, audio files, as well as videos. So without further ado, let's dive in. Wonderful stuff. Now for our very first topic, which is working with HTML attribute. But first of all, let's have a look at what attributes actually are. Well, to put it simply, attributes are essentially just additional information about elements, and we use these attributes to expand the functionality of certain elements, and not just the functionality, the look and feel of certain elements. For example, you could make a paragraph tag bold, you could underline it, you could give it a border. Attributes essentially control the behavior of various elements, and it's very important to keep in mind that every single, if not all elements or tags have an attribute that you can manipulate for some sort of output or some sort of outcome. And also keep in mind that various elements or various tags also share similar attributes. Now, when it comes to attributes, there are a couple of things that we must keep in mind. And the first is that an attribute is always specified and designated in the opening tag of an element. This is extremely important, okay? And then following this, attribute names are case sensitive, so you cannot use uppercase and lowercase as a mixture when you are specifying attributes. And then lastly, when it comes to attributes, this essentially comprises of two parts, and these are very important. The first part is the name of the attribute that you want to manipulate and the value that you are assigning to the name of the attribute. Now, this is all good and well, but let's have a look at an example of how an attribute actually works. Now here we have a very typical example of what an attribute looks like, and essentially what we have is this name property, and the name property here that we want to alter is the align property or the align attribute, okay? This is the property or the attribute that we want to manipulate inside our code. And then the value that we are assigning to the align is either left, center, and right. And let's have a look at the output. This is what our output looks like. We'll see in the first instance of the first paragraph, we set the align attribute to left. We set the second paragraph align attribute to center. And then we set the third paragraph element, and the line for that was right. And if we have a look at our output, it works out accordingly. We have this left aligned paragraph, the center aligned one, as well as the right aligned paragraph. Now, I think based on that, you sort of get the idea of when and why we use attributes, right? Now, hopefully this makes a bit more sense where attributes are concerned. So moving on, what are some common attributes out there? And here is a list of common attributes that you will most likely be using in your web development career. The first two are extremely important, and we'll dig a little deeper when it comes to the ID and the class attribute. And essentially the ID attribute just specifies a unique identifier for a particular element. And we tend to use the ID attribute when we want to single out an element either on a web page or within the entirety of a website that we perhaps want to style individually from all other elements, or if we want to use it for JavaScript. Okay, now I will be showing you an example here, so we won't be spending too much time on the details when it comes to the ID and the class attribute. Now, the class attribute is quite different from the ID attribute. Now, with the ID attribute, we said that we use this if we want to uniquely identify an element within our website. A class attribute allows us to group elements that share various characteristics or have characteristics in common, and perhaps we want to style them accordingly. So maybe you have buttons in your website and you want to make sure that you adhere to a certain theme or style guide when styling those buttons. Okay, so we group elements within a class. The href attribute is something we've touched base on, and this allows us to specify a path or URL path to a different link or file path within our website. Now, we also have the target attribute, which is quite interesting because when you're linking documents together or when you have hyperlinks within your website, the website will either open up in a new tab or within that particular tab that you are inside, or it will open a whole new window. And this is why we use the target attribute in the event that we want the behavior of how our hyperlinking works and we want to change it. And here we can use the underscore blank, underscore self, as well as underscore parent. And I'll show you an example here in future. Now, the style tag is probably one of the most popular ones, and we use this tag or this attribute when we want to define inline styling within an HTML document. And in the tutorial we'll be doing today, I'll show you exactly how the styling attribute works. But the styling attribute essentially allows you to manipulate various parameters or various styling parameters of a single element. And then we have the source attribute, which is just a path to some sort of image in a website or a video or an audio file. We also have the alt, which displays alternate text if a media file can't be loaded. And then also we can set the width and the height of certain multimedia files such as images as well as videos. Now, earlier on, we did mention that there are two core attributes that every web developer must know in the web development space, and this includes the ID attribute and the class attribute. Let's dig a little deeper to see the difference between the two. So when it comes to the ID attribute, it's important that your ID that you assign, the attribute, the ID specifically that you assign to an element must be unique to that element and that element only. And we use this ID to reference an HTML element in CSS as well as in JavaScript. Now, later on when we touch base with JavaScript, this will make a bit more sense. Coming up soon is going to be CSS. And then very, very important, the notation of referencing an ID when it comes to CSS, we must always ensure that we use the hashtag symbol. This is how we reference an ID in CSS. And when we get to CSS, I will show you exactly what this means. Now, moving on, we also have the class attribute, and very similar to the ID, we can assign a specific class. This can be a string, it can just be a bunch of characters that sort of references that particular class. The difference between a class and an ID, as we mentioned previously, is that a class is used to group items that will share common characteristics such as the color of a button, the animation of a button, or even the size of the button. Okay, we also use classes, much like we use IDs, to reference our elements in CSS as well as JavaScript. The only difference here is that we also precede the class notation by a full stop when we reference it in CSS. And again, be sure that we will be covering an example for this. Now, we've been discussing attributes such as classes and IDs, but I think given that these two are so important, let's jump straight into a practical and start coding so we can better understand the difference between an ID and a class using styling. So before we even get started with our coding session today, let's have a look at what we are trying to achieve. And essentially what you are seeing here in front of you is a very, very basic website with just a heading 1 tag as well as subheading tags. These are H2 tags, by the way. And then we've got a couple of paragraph tags down here as well, which is separated by a horizontal line break from our heading tags over here. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that, again, even though this is very simple, the idea here is to demonstrate to you how we can categorize certain things according to IDs and classes. Now, at the top over here, we are actually using IDs, believe it or not, whereas here at the bottom, we are using classes to implement the design and the sort of color pop at the bottom over here. Now, without further ado, let's dive in and get coding. Now, to get started, the first thing I essentially want to do is I want to boot up my Atom, okay? And by now you should be familiar with the user interface and how we go about using Atom. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save this file as. So I'll save it in my Shore sandbox under lesson 4, and I'll save it as something that's descriptive of the specific page, which is HTML or IDs and classes. .html. Never forget the .html notation at the end, okay? That is extremely important. And then once that's done, I can now just essentially type in HTML. It will autocomplete the text for me. So now we have this boilerplate that we are used to, and I'm going to start coding in between my body tag, but I might just want to add a bit of content. So to do that, what I'm essentially going to do now is I'm first of all going to create a title for my website, and I'm going to call this IDs and classes, because remember, I want this title or this tab to be descriptive of what I'm trying to achieve for this practical. I'll save that, and then just to make sure everything is loading correctly, I'll head over to my sandbox, putting that over to this side, and I'll open this up. Let's see what we actually get. And so far things are working out just fine, and we can tell that by noting that we actually have our title located here at the top. Fantastic. So now that we know everything is hooked up and is working correctly, we can start writing our important bit of code. And the first thing I want to do is I want to create a header for this, okay? Just to stick to convention, I'll say header, and inside this header I'm going to again say IDs and classes. Okay, I'll save that, and I need to wrap this in a header tag or in my h1 tag, because this is the highest order of any given header tag, the h1 tag. Save that, head back over, refresh. Perfect. Now I know for certain things are working out just fine. Moving on, I want to now start working inside the body. I'm going to give this a bit of space here, and inside my body tag I'm going to create a h2 tag, okay? According to our specifications and what we're working towards, we were using h2 tags. So yeah, I'm going to say h2. Now, this is where the important bit comes in, okay? First of all, let me say I am subheading 1. Okay, I'm saying subheading because we have this major heading at the top over here. Very, very important to note. So with that being said, I will now add an ID. And to add an ID, what we do here is we are now going to add an attribute to this element or this tag, okay? And I'm going to say ID, that's it, equal, and remember, because it's case sensitive, we need to wrap this in quotation marks. So I'm going to say heading underscore 1. So what have we done here now? Let's save this. We've now given this element an ID named or called heading 1. So think of it like your own ID number or your social security number. You are uniquely identified by your ID number, or again your social security number, and likewise so is this particular element, this I am subheading 1, this h2 element. Okay, so I just want you to keep that in the back of your head as we move along. I'm going to create another h2 tag, and I'm going to, again, I'll just say I am subheading 2. And then I'll add another ID. So just ID equals quotation marks, open and close. And then I'll say heading 2. Great stuff. And then I'll do the exact same. Now you might be asking yourself, why am I not copying and pasting here? I want you to also get into the habit of actually writing out your code. Okay, this is quite important because you don't always want to be copying and pasting. You need to write your code out. It just makes things a lot easier for you. So I'm going to say I am subheading, this should be subheading, I am subheading 3, and then I'm going to give this one an ID of equals open close quotation, and I'll say heading underscore 3. Wonderful. Save that, and let's see what we have so far in terms of our results. Great stuff. So now we've got 3 headings under our main heading that we created earlier, so everything seems to be working just fine. Next, what I want to do is I want to add a horizontal line break, and this is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to say HR, and I'm going to add an attribute here. Remember, we can use the width attribute with the HR tag, and I'll say the width of this is going to be something like, let's go with 1300 pixels. Save that, head back over to our website, and if I refresh, wonderful. So now I'm separating my headings from the content that I'm going to add at the bottom over here. And after the horizontal line break, I can start typing out my other code. So I'm going to go to the paragraph tag, and here I'm just going to say I am paragraph 1. I'm going to give this an ID. Or here, instead, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give this one a class. Okay, and similar to typing out ID, you say class instead. And I'm going to say equal, open quotation marks. I'm going to say custom P1, custom underscore P. Yeah, there we go. Okay, save that, and I'm going to create another one. So P, and I'll say I am paragraph 2. Give this one a class. I'm going to say class equals custom paragraph 1 as well, and I'll explain in a second what's going on here. Okay, just bear with me for the time being. So one last one for my custom P class 1, and I'll say class equals custom P1, and over here I'm just going to say I am paragraph 3. Wonderful. Okay, now the next paragraph element that I'm going to create here is going to be slightly different in nature, but it's going to say more or less the same thing. First off, I'll say I am paragraph 4. Now the class that I'm going to assign here is going to be slightly different. I'm going to say class, and I'm going to say custom. Instead of custom underscore P underscore 1, I'm going to say underscore P underscore 2. Now what's happening here? We are differentiating between 2 classes. We have our custom P1 and our custom P2 over here. They are both classes, okay? And then over here we've created our IDs, and that's all good and well. And I want to create one more of these, so I'm just going to copy and paste this just to make it more simple. I'm going to paste it here at the bottom, and I'm going to say custom P2. I'm going to keep it as 2, and I'm going to change this over here to custom paragraph 5 so that we can differentiate between the various paragraphs. If I refresh my browser over here, I've got 4 headings. The one at the top, we're not necessarily going to be manipulate with any sort of attributes. We're going to be working with these 3 headings, and we're going to be working with these 5 paragraph tags. Okay, so just make sure my spelling is on point. Wonderful, fantastic. Everything seems to be in order. Now, how do we use IDs and classes, and why are they so important? Now, I'm going to show you in a second. The first thing we have to do now is we have to create a style element. Okay, and what I'm going to show you now is the not so great way to actually use the style tag or the style element. There are better ways of doing that. But in order to understand why we avoid using this approach, we have to first use the approach, right? So in my head tag over here, okay, this is where it opens and this is where it closes. I need to add a style sort of sheet, if you will. Not really a style sheet, but more of just a style parameter. So I'm going to say over here, I'm going to give it some space, just indent it nicely, and I'm going to type style to autocomplete for me, and I've got this thing called media screen. Okay, that's all good and well. The media screen is just the type of device that you are targeting. In this case, it's your desktop monitor, so we specify screen over here. Lovely stuff. So after this, we can now start putting in our styling for each element. I'm going to start with the header 1. Okay, so I'm going to say, put some space over here, or actually not. Remember, when we target IDs, we have to use the hashtag symbol. So heading 1, it's autocomplete, great stuff, heading 1. And I'm going to open the curly brace. When we use CSS, we use curly brace, okay? So we are targeting every element, or the element with the ID of heading 1, which is this one over here, the first one, and we are now going to style it accordingly. Okay, so just bear with me for a sec. So I'm going to say background colon and not equal. When we get to CSS, I'll explain how all of this works. For now, I just want to get my point across in terms of why it is that we use classes and IDs as extremely important attributes when it comes to web development. So the background color I'm changing to yellow, and the font size of that heading I am changing to 28 pixels. So I'm overriding the default font size for any heading 2 tags, or this particular heading 2 tag. Okay, let's save that, head back over to our browser. And if we refresh, voila, now we've targeted this specific element with a particular ID and styled that one accordingly. You'll see the font size is slightly bigger than these two over here, and we have a background color of yellow. Now let's go and do the same or something similar for the rest of our tags. So over here at the bottom, what I want to go and do is I want to add another one for heading 2. Okay, open curly brace, and the close curly brace comes automatically, and I'm going to change the background color to red, and the font size I'm going to change font size. Now you might be wondering why these are not being colored as the rest of the code over here. I just have to fix my braces. Let's actually see if we can do that quickly. Oh, there we go. Fantastic. Okay, so now we've got colored styled characters when we're actually working in CSS, which just makes it a lot more readable if you ask me. And I'm going to say the font size here is 34 pixels. And if you do find that your text are not being colorized, maybe just try and bumping this down and bringing it back up. Sometimes you do get a couple of bugs in Atom that just seem so weird. Okay, and then I'm going to get back up to my browser, refresh this, and voila, there you go, I've got a red second subheading. Now when it comes to classes, this is slightly different. So here we've targeted each of our IDs individually, we've styled them individually. Okay, and that's the point of an ID. You uniquely identify a specific ID, target that ID, and style it the way you want. We can also do this with JavaScript. So I'm going to head back over here. Now when it comes to classes, we don't use the hashtag, we use a full stop symbol. Okay, and I'm going to say custom p1 open curly brace, close curly brace, and I'm going to say over here the background should be green. Okay, and the font, let's just say font style should be italic. Okay, let's see what we have so far. So font style might be missing something here, but it all looks good, so I'll just save that. Looks perfectly fine. Now refresh this, and now I've added italics to this paragraph tag. You'll see it's different from this one over here, which is normal, and I've also added a green background. But notice the difference here is that here we managed to style 3 paragraph tags using just that couple of lines of code in CSS. And this is why we use classes. Okay, this is why classes are so important and why they are so powerful, so that you don't have to go and style each of these individually like you would have done with an ID attribute. Okay, and then I'll do one more thing over here. Just bring this in. And now I'm going to custom paragraph 2, which is the last two at the bottom of the page, and I'm going to give it a background of orange. I'm missing something here. Background, here we go. I need to add my colon. Okay, and then I'm going to give this one a text, say text transformation. Okay, these are all attributes, by the way. Text transformation, background, font style, these are all attributes that we can manipulate using CSS, although in CSS we tend to call them properties. Okay, so text, it's actually text transform if I'm not mistaken, and I'm going to change this to uppercase. Close that off. Remember also, when you are working in CSS, you need to add your semicolon at the end of here. I'll come back, refresh, and there we go. Now these have been increase to uppercase and with a background of orange. So I think you're starting to see the point here, right? When we want to group certain elements together and style them accordingly because they share similar characteristics, we would use classes, okay? When you want to target them individually, you would use your IDs instead. Now that's a very simple and basic example, but the idea is just here so that you can understand what's going on. Now let's try something slightly different, okay? Let's head back over here. And I'm going to change this one over here, custom paragraph 1, which says I am paragraph 1. I'm going to change this to 2 and watch what happens. I'll save that, get back over, and there we go. Now this one is treated as a class object of the custom paragraph 2 elements, okay, or classes. So if I change it back, let's just say back over. If I change it back to 1, now it's being treated as the custom P1, okay? If I refresh, there you go. It defaults back to its normal state that we had it initially, okay? Because we assigned the custom paragraph 1 class attribute to that. Lovely stuff. Now maybe we should just clean up our code slightly and then just... I'm a big believer in always commenting in my code, so it just makes it easy for developers to see. So I'm going to say this is my styling. This is my styling. There we go. And for these over here, I'll say open up dash dash. Here we are testing IDs. Close it off. I'll just copy and paste this comment because it's more or less the same of what I'm trying to achieve in this part of my code over here. And I'm just going to say something like, here we are testing classes instead of IDs. Lovely stuff. Great stuff. And there you go. That's your first introduction to using attributes in HTML. Things are going to get a lot more complex, but I firmly believe that it's important to always introduce students to the basics before we tackle the more abstract and complex topics. Also, I do want you to take note that in the event that you're looking for the source code for these practicals that we do throughout this course, they will be made available to you in the summary notes that I've compiled. So please feel free to check out your toolkits and access your summary notes if you want to copy and paste my source code into your IDE and play around with it. Lovely stuff. Now let's jump back into the content and the slides. Excellent. Now I hope that practical was quite useful in introducing you to attributes. Moving on, we are now going to be covering creating tables in HTML. And tables are quite useful when we want to organize information inside of a website. But let's dive a little deeper and unpack how we create tables in HTML. Now again, when it comes to tables in HTML, we tend to use tables to organize information in cells and rows and columns. And essentially a web table is an HTML structure which consists of multiple table rows as well as columns as well as cells like we just mentioned. Now when creating HTML tables, it's important to note that a table is a block level element. Now you get block level elements as well as inline elements. We still have to distinguish between the two, but we will do that once we get to CSS. And then lastly, the size of the table is defined by the number of rows and cells as well as the content inside of the table hosting that content. Now, unlike many of the tags and elements we've worked with before, when it comes to creating a table, we have to use all of the tags that we actually see here to create a full element of a table, okay? And first we have the table tag, which essentially just defines the table. It lets the browser or the client know that this is a table that I'm about to create. The table row just defines a row in a particular table. The table heading, which is the th tag, is sort of your first row in any given table. And this provides context with regards to your columns and your rows inside of your table. So think of it as a heading for certain columns inside of your table. And then lastly, our TD tag is just a simple cell inside of our HTML table. And when we go through the example I'm about to show you, I want you to think about it like an Excel sheet, okay? Now, when it comes to HTML tables, here is a simple example of what the code would look like. And in this table, we only have something like 4 rows, but one of those rows is our heading, which consists of first name, last name, and age. And then below that, we have 3 separate rows. And this includes a row for Jill Smith with the age of 50, and so on with Eve, as well as with John. And if we interpret this code, this is what it would look like in our browser. Pretty straightforward, right? Now, I know the code can look slightly intimidating, but let's just break it down piece by piece so we can understand how the structure is interpreted by the browser. So given the example we had a look at earlier, this is the exact same table. But again, how do we compile this table using HTML code? And essentially we first start off by using the table tags, okay, the opening tag as well as the closing tag. And this essentially gives us the whole table. Here again, we are defining the table, much like we are defining an HTML document. Okay, so all other tags would come between my opening table tag as well as my closing table tag. And the first one we'll start off with here is our header cell. Okay, now our header cell, also known as our TH, is essentially each column that has a header. Here we have first name, last name, as well as age as column parameters for our table. Moving forward, we can then include a cell. And here we have this example of Doe, okay, which is the last name of the first name person called John, and this is considered a data cell. The TD tag is considered a data cell, much like in an Excel sheet where you have a single cell. It's essentially the same thing. And then ultimately all these data cells together make up a complete row, okay, and this is considered a table row. So we would specify various TD cells for each column inside our TR tags, if you will, to make up a complete table row. Wonderful. Now we will be doing an example of this in future where I will show you how to compile a table from scratch. Okay, so don't stress if this doesn't make all that much sense to you right now. Now, furthermore to tables, we can also add things such as borders. And what we have over here is a very simple example of a table. I want you to take note of one thing though, that I have purposely omitted the rest of the code for this particular table. So I've sort of just cut it off at our TH. Tags, if you will. Okay, now we have item, we have the item name, we have the cost price, we have the price, as well as the profit for various car parts over here. Okay, and the only thing I want to actually really show you here is that even with tables, they have their own attributes. And in this example over here, which is exactly the same code, the exact same example, we now add a border which neatly organizes our data, and it looks much more appealing to the viewer. And again, the only thing we essentially added here was a border. We added that border attribute and we gave it an amount of 5 pixels. Excellent. Now before we wrap things up, let's have a look at what's coming up in lesson 5 of module 3, which is our next lesson. In our next lesson, we implement some of the most important elements that we've learned to date, and this will essentially encompass everything that we've learned. This includes attributes as well as all the elements and tags that we have found useful. We'll also have a look at using buttons and forms to accept user input, because this is going to be an important part of web development when we start processing data using JavaScript. So stay tuned, because the next couple of lessons is going to be really exciting. Wonderful. Now let's wrap things up with our final topic, and that is using multimedia in HTML. And this includes things such as audio files, images, as well as video files. First of all, let's turn our attention to images in HTML. And many of us have seen images embedded in websites all over the web. And images essentially improve the design and the layout of your web page, depending on how you've sort of broken up the sections of your web page. And we tend to use the image tag when we want to embed an image inside a website. Again, this is quite powerful, especially for things such as e-commerce websites where you want your user to actually see the products you're selling, or whether it's a blog, for example, and you'd like to include stock images. Images are really, really useful and very, very appealing. Now, here are some common tags that we can consider when we actually use images, okay? Or not just tags, but actually attributes. First of all, we use the source attribute, which is the src, and this specifies a path or URL to the image that you are referencing, and that will be rendered in your website. We can also use the alt tag, and by now we know the alt tag or attribute is used in case that the image can't be displayed, if you will. Okay, and then we can also set the width and the height of the image. We could set these independently if we wanted to, but if we set either the width or the height, our image is going to work out the ratio automatically to give you the best scale of any sort of image, especially if you increase the width or the height. Now, here is a typical example of what the code will look like for an image inside our HTML website, or just our code. Okay, And for those of you who don't know me that well, this is something I might not have disclosed, but I am a huge fan of engineering, especially when it comes to cars. And in this example over here, we've embedded an image of a Toyota Supra. Now, let's have a look at the code first of all. First, we open up our tag with the image tag, and then we specify the source, and that is the path to where that image is laying inside our folder. And then we supply it with an alternative text in case that image can't be displayed. And then we also set the attribute, the width specifically, to 600 pixels. Moving on, we also have audio in HTML, and audio is a really fantastic way in the event that you want to embed some sort of music or just a sound clip or even a podcast in your website. Okay, and essentially the audio tag is what we use to specify audio when we want to bring it into our environment or our HTML script. Okay, now there are a couple of conditions that we must take into consideration, but we'll have a look at that shortly. Okay, and this is the standard way of embedding audio by using the audio tag. Now, web browsers generally have their own native way with controls when it comes to handling different kinds of audio, and each browser varies in terms of the user interface and how that control panel looks. Okay, very importantly, there are a variety of audio formats that HTML5 does support. This includes MP3, AAC, OGG, as well as WAV. I think OGG might just be a video format. I'm not entirely sure. I just have to double check on that. But for the most part, you do have support with your multiple and your standard audio files out there. Wonderful. Now, much like with our images, we also have common attributes that we can use when it comes to audio. We first have the controls attribute, which specifies the controls that should be displayed, and this includes your pause button, your play button, your skip forward, your trackpad. We also have the autoplay attribute, which allows you to automatically play an audio file when the user navigates to that particular page. Apart from this, we have the loop attribute that allows the audio to just keep looping and looping and looping until the web page is exited or until the user actually pauses the audio. We also have muted, which is self-explanatory. This just allows you to mute an audio file. And very importantly, we also have the source attribute. And once again, this is just the path as to where you can locate that audio file. Now, I said there are certain things we must take into consideration when we use the audio tag. Okay, and this is essentially that when we embed audio using the audio tag, we must at least use the source as well as the control attribute to load the audio correctly, else the audio is just not going to play, or you might just run into a bug. And here is a typical example of how we can embed audio inside a website. Here we've just opened the audio tag, we specified the source as v8 loudrevs.mp3, and then we added the attribute controls without any sort of value. We just said controls, and then this is what our output looks like. We have the play button, the trackpad, as well as the ability to mute and unmute our audio file. Now, lastly, we do also have videos in HTML, and videos are an excellent way for just adding a short snippet of videos or even a lengthy video if you want to, or if you just want to showcase some video content that you might have created yourself. And essentially, when it comes to videos, we use the video element or the video tag. And it's a good idea to always include the width and the height attributes when it comes to videos, because this will allow you to scale down your video or scale your video up even. But you also want to consider the user's bandwidth. Okay. Now, a typical example of how we embed videos in HTML, before we even get into the example, much like with the audio element or the audio tag, you must at least specify two parameters. Okay. This includes the source attribute as well as the controls attribute. And in this code snippet over here, what we have is a video with the source attribute. We've taken the width and we've given it a width of 720 pixels, and we've also added the controls attribute. Now, in this little example over here, this video is just a snapshot of a video that I took online. And this video is a drag race between a BMW M2 competition pack and a Toyota GR Supra. Now, just a quick question. Who do you think actually won this drag race? If you want to check out the results, you can check out the video at cars.co.za. The results are actually quite staggering. I hope to see you soon for lesson 5. We will be working with HTML inputs. So for all of that and more, I'll see you in the next lesson. Cheers.